has a full 50 minutes worth of information for us. I'm Carly Lemon. I'm with Underwood Conservation. Ryan Bartelmeyer and I have put together this session and this track. We are lucky this morning to be joined by Ann Crow, who is a fish biologist and lamprey specialist with U.S. Fish and Wildlife. She's going to talk with us today about considerations of lamprey within habitat projects. And she's okay with questions throughout the presentation. So if you've got a question, go ahead and politely interject, and she's happy to make it interactive all the way through. So go ahead, Ann, and take it away.
Yeah, so I'm Ann Rhoda, and I work for U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, literally actually across the parking lot. So we've got the Fish and Wildlife Conservation Office right there. So I want to commend you all on selecting such an awesome location for your conference. Clearly love it this time of year. It's awesome. I'm actually the lamprey biologist in our office. I work in our native fish program, and I'm really excited to be talking to you all today about this topic that's really near and dear to my heart. But this comes with a little bit of a caveat, which is that I'm really the lamprey side of this. And this presentation is kind of a combination of topics from a bunch of different presentations we've been doing as a series of standby workshops. So the habitat part of this, I'm a little bit newer to, and I recognize I'm in a room of experts. And also probably some engineers. So I just want to acknowledge that while I feel really good on the lamprey side of things, please be lenient with me if I wobble. I think. So I want to start off again by acknowledging contributions from folks who have worked on this project with me, Christina Lang and Mark Venture, especially with WPFW. And jump into just saying that much of the habitat restoration that we're doing in the Pacific Northwest is really driven by species recovery plans that are totally prioritizing salmon. And many of the projects that benefit salmon are aimed at restoring natural processes, stream function, floodplain habitat connectivity. It's likely that all of this work we're doing for salmon really does also benefit a whole host of other species, including lampreys. And that's particularly true when we're doing work that is resulting in increased diversity of habitats. And in particular for lamprey, and we'll talk a little bit about this regarding like life history, diverse substrates connecting optional habitats, improving cover and water quality. All those things we do for salmon are good for lamprey, but there are also sort of these like key life history and swimming differences that make lamprey considerations a little different than just you working in the salmon world. So really quickly show of hands, how many folks here are pretty familiar with lamprey? I have some. Okay, so we're going to go through this like some kind of basic like history stuff to get everyone up to speed if you're not as familiar. Today we'll go through a little bit of ecology, talk about their life cycle, what kind of habitat they need. Talk a little bit about passage, and I want to include this because I recognize that folks may be involved with passage programs either in your restoration work, and a lot of the passage considerations actually roll over directly into sort of stream conservation design as well. And then kind of do a deeper dive into the stream restoration projects, considerations for lamprey, doing pre-project assessments, in permitting, in design, and in implementation. Species diversity, worldwide, there's about 40 species of lamprey, and in North America, we actually have 36 of them. So we are super rich when it comes to lamprey diversity. Just on the West Coast, excluding Alaska, there are 10. And here in Washington State, that diversity gets pared down a little bit to 3, really 2 species. So we have our Pacific lamprey, which many folks may be a little bit familiar with. This is our anadromous bay climbing lamprey. And then we also have Western river lamprey and Western brook lamprey. And until recently, these were thought to be 2 different species. And now with modern genetic methods, we've realized that kind of like steelhead and rainbow trout, this is actually a species pair. So Western brook lamprey are the resident non-migratory version of this lamprey species, and Western river lamprey are the migratory anadromous parasitic form. And so really in Washington, we're dealing with kind of Pacific lamprey and then loosely grouped lampetra, because most of the time when we're handling them up to like their larval stage, they haven't determined, we can't determine looking at them whether they're going to be an anadromous fish or a resident fish. And I do want to stress that like most of what I'll talk about today, and most of what we know is really specific to Pacific lamprey. We know very little about Western brooks and rivers. So if anything, because they're smaller, passage considerations and their kind of climbing and swimming abilities are going to be like even more reduced than Pacific lampreys. So, you know, they kind of need almost like more help in project design than some of our stronger swimming fishes. And I do want to note while we're here that talking today, of course, about our native lampreys here in Washington State, and we do not want to confuse them with what the general public often does with our invasive sea lampreys that have invaded the Great Lakes and the tremendous ecological damage there. We're talking about our friendly, in particular Pacific lamprey. And to drive that point home, I just have a little chart here of all the different ecosystem contributions that Pacific lamprey provide throughout their life cycle. So these are all ways that they are contributing back. That's, I acknowledge lampreys sometimes have a little bit of empirical moments, but I celebrate one of the ecosystem services they provide. In particular, they are an incredible prey item. They're a cartilaginous fish in our bones. They're very fatty. They're full of oil. We jokingly refer to them as little floating sticks of butter. So everything wants to eat that, whether it's in a marine environment, as adults or juveniles, or in a freshwater environment. We're talking fish, mammals, birds. Everything wants to eat them. In terms of like stream animals specifically, there are a little bit of some ecosystem engineers, right? So the adults dig around and they build nests and spawn, and they move a bunch of sediments around. And same thing with the larvae, they're filter feeding in the bottoms of our stream bed, acting kind of like earthworms. So they are helping to reduce embeddedness. They're helping to like bioturbate and aerate the bottoms of our streams. Some of those activities, you know, result in increased macro and vertebrate productivity. And also spawning, right? Macros love to eat those nutrient subsidies that are coming in from purposes and from eggs. And then also because the larvae are filter feeders and they have this extended period of time they're living in our streams, they can contribute to improved water quality. So there's kind of like this whole host of great things that lampreys bring to our streams. I want to talk a little bit about life cycle, and this is an area that's sort of constantly changing with lamprey because the more we learn, the more we realize that some of these time spans, what we thought was like 3 years is actually 10 years. So stay tuned because the more we learn, the more the generation time and sort of average lamprey life cycle is getting bigger and bigger. For folks who are familiar with salmon, right, this is going to look a bit familiar because they're anadromous. So we have our adults that are in freshwater and spawning habitat. They're going to build nests just like salmon do, and they're going to spawn and lay their eggs. After they lay their eggs, they do die. And so those carcasses are subsequently derived nutrients back to our stream systems. The eggs are kind of neutrally buoyant and they sort of float around for about 2 weeks. They hatch out the pearl larvae. And the pearl larvae then drift downstream to soft sediments where they can burrow and start this horrible life history stage. This used to be called seeds, and now we're simplified like fish larvae. And this is really interesting because during this time they don't have an eye, they just don't have a hood, they don't have a mouth, filter feeders, growing on detritus. But it lasts a really long time. So we used to think that this was like 3 to 5 years. And then we did some research and we're like, okay, 3 to 10 years. And now it's like looking like it might actually be like 3 to 13 or even 15 years. So that number keeps going up. And at some point, after that extended larval phase, they get big enough and they transform. And this is, they become a juvenile. This used to be a macrophthalmia. And this is kind of like their small stage, right? So they grow a mouth with these keratinous teeth that they're going to use in their parasitic life phase. They grow an eye, they get really silvery because they're going to be migrating, and they move out of their freshwater streams, out to the eastern rivers, and migrate out to the ocean. And in the ocean, they are basically juveniles for again, some increasingly large number of years that we used to think was like 2 to 5, and now we're 1 to 7. And it may go up again. So while they're out there, they are feeding on a whole variety of different kinds of marine species, and they are gaining a ton of body weight, going from something that's like 110 millimeters, something that's like almost a meter long. They're traveling around the ocean and hitchhiking to their destinations. And after again some chunk of time, they decide that it's time to go and spawn. And they're gonna navigate back to fresh water and move up through our stream systems into spawning habitats, but not necessarily where they themselves spawn. So a major difference here is that unlike salmon, they very don't home. There's probably like some level of regional homing that happens just based on their like dispersal differences. So lamprey that originating in the Columbia Basin are probably more likely to end up back in the Columbia Basin. But we definitely have seen lamprey that, you know, were originated here that ended up being tagged in like Russia. So if they're hitchhiking on a whale, they could potentially go really far.
That's what my question is about. Do they hitchhike on the way back or do they swim on their own?
We think that they're hitchhiking. We don't necessarily know. There's like anecdotal evidence, like every for lamprey, lots of anecdotes. You know, there's like pictures of like lamprey on whale flukes, right? And shark scars, right? Sharks. They're not the greatest swimmers, which I'll get into. So I think that they must be using some assistance of larger body animals to truly play distances.
But back up the river, like back up.
Oh,
to
sorry, after the river, at that point, they are directing themselves. Yeah.
So in the ocean, they're hitchhiking around fun and.
Yeah,
Coming
once they're
back,
back
spawn
in
there.
fresh water, they are self-directed. Any other questions? A little bit about their habitat. Excuse me. So their habitat needs are super complex, and compared to even like salmon, because of this really complicated life history, they actually kind of require more diverse habitats than in same deer. And that's something that I kind of bear in mind as we're thinking about restoration projects. And this is really specific to that horrible life history phase that I talked about and had to settle to be able to burrow. And so habitat for larval lamprey largely consists of pretty defined verticals, and it can be sand. It typically has to have a bit of organic matter because that's what verticals are feeding on. So our smallest larvae, when they settle and start to grow, are going to be fines, mixed substrates, so kind of like fines plus a little bit of sand up to like a little bit of gravel is typically utilized by the larger larvae. Again, it needs to be soft enough that they can burrow into it, but those larger fish are able to burrow deeper, and they're able to use some of those like interstitial spaces in between the gravel that's covered. And on the juvenile side of things, really, you don't see a lot of habitat use out in cobble areas unless your system is just like chock full of lamprey and we have no place else to go. So in like the most, you know, well-stocked like stream density situations, they'll be on cobble, but typically that's really reserved for like the biggest larvae that again can use those interstitial spaces, maybe some of those out migrating juveniles, but not a lot of use of cobble areas. And on the adult side of things, I want to mention that they're coming back from the ocean to freshwater spawning habitats. Sometimes that process can take up to a year. So they'll start to move into the Columbia in the spring, and our fish here in the Wenatchee don't spawn until like June, July. So they have like almost a full year in fresh water, which time they're not feeding, they're just trying to get to those spawning locations. And they need a lot of cover to do that. And so an important component of considerations for adult lamprey is actually like big force substrate boulders, places that are overhung, places they can hide, places they cannot get even for a year when we spawn. So big substrate also wants to be pretty much like anything that helps with cover. So that sort of wraps up a little bit of the habitat piece, and I was going to jump into talking about some passage parts. Any questions on habitats and life history? Yeah.
How affected are they by spring temperatures?
So they are definitely affected, but not as sensitively as salmon. So really for them, like thermal limits, probably about 20 degrees Celsius is when we start to see like rate of mortality. But they actually appear to do well in 15, 16, 17 degrees. I think the bull trout find really problematic. Lamprey for the most part can kind of short off. Yeah,
So that's a big range for their village techniques. You know, just like nature versus that, but. But it's cheap, but like that. Thank you.
so there's been a lot of translocation where lamprey have been introduced to areas that they were actually rooted from. And in those translocated areas, you know, I don't have a great idea of like what's sink and what's source yet, but those fish grow insanely fast. So I'm guessing that a bunch of it is probably like at a biological level is density dependent effects. Because in those streams where lamprey are brand new and places like Macadam that are not like super productive streams. The larval lamprey are growing in search. So first cut is that it's density dependent driven, and then, yeah, the presence of good habitat, which we'll get into a little more, is really more good habitat is for larval lamprey. You know, we're talking fines with a bit of organic material. They definitely need cold water and well oxygenated areas, so it's not like they're seasonally disconnected side channels that get all stagnant. Oh, lots of organics that are gross, right? Good habitat in streams that also stop substrates.
In some of these kind of ideal habitats, in a fairly healthy streams, what is the kind of population density that you might expect? Maybe you're getting this, like, if you're planning a project, you know, is there any way that you determine, like, thresholds for, like, what would you expect if you had to do a count or you were trying to do a count? I'm trying to think the density.
Yeah, kind of like how you cipher that.
Yeah.
That's a great question, and I'd say we have a great piece for that because it is super variable. I mean, you can kind of, especially if you have areas where there's like really good rate of exchange, that tends to be another investor's location, and they're just like, holy. And if any of you have ever been involved in right, like shooting salvage, you cannot get them. There's no way to do it. So at some point on the project planning and like minimization, you have a salvage piece. You have to be like, okay, these are not listed species. Do your best effort, put in a good amount of time, but don't get hurt yourself trying to remove every last lamprey. Moving on, I guess then to adult passage, and this is upstream passage. The important things to remember with lamprey is that they are not as fast as powerful as the salmon. Designing passage structures around fish ways around. Their maximum swim speeds are really about 70 per second. And in fishway land, that really is like the very lower end of velocities that fishways typically target in their traffic setting. Typically are more in the like 8 to 10 feet per second velocities. So these guys are not going to be like the sprinters of the fish world, but they are really, really, really amazing at playing. And they do that with a sort of like burst and attached swim style where they use their mouth. And lamprey world we like to refer to this as the world dance. To suck on things, right? So they're gonna find smooth surfaces like bedrock, sometimes even like wood, and suck onto it anytime the water velocities get too high. And basically that suction enables them to be really fantastic swimmers. And they can actually climb like sherbet walls. So there are a lot of lamprey passage structures that are built and engineered around the idea of using their climbing ability to help them bypass fishways and structures that they're successful that are understanding. And the photo here of the Willamette Falls is kind of a good illustration of this. Lamprey pass Willamette Falls with a problem called total, and they do that by first climbing up like natural falls, the bedrock. And then there's like the dam built on top of the bedrock that's vertical, and they go up that. And then in the summer, they have flashboards up there to raise the reservoir, and they go up that too. So, while they may not be the fastest swimming, they definitely have some capabilities beyond what salmon are releasing. And so this is just a little video of this plane
Look at this.
this is Lamprey, and I think this one is actually from Lincoln Falls. That's right, so we go really involved in literally everything, right? Yeah, they're all just like sucking on to this old nasty board concrete with their mouths, and then they attach it, they go really hard and they move forward, and then they. But that, they have to let consumption, put a little bit of water. We can't do it on curly dry surfaces, but then also notice there's nothing common here. Where they all get. Cool. So as that relates to passage, which is our next video, this one is taken from a fishway, and it's a vertical slot fishway, and it's looking down. And you're gonna see a lamprey right here, trying to work its way around the corner through this vertical slot. And it's gonna keep trying and trying, because it's kind of struggling with this problem of a bad attachment surface and high water velocities. Yeah, and then eventually it makes it around the corner, and then there's this gate well slot with like a really sharp 90 degree, and it can't maintain section there, and it gets pushed back in. So kind of like visual representation of how some of our fishway design are really problematic. And why do we care about passage, right? It's like the same reasons that we care about it for salmon. So you're talking about anytime you have a passage delay, whether it's upstream or downstream, right? You're gonna incur more mortality because you're getting more exposure to predators. And you have like that penalties. All the energy and calories you spend trying to pass structures is less for you to compete in migration, less for you to put your big rock back. On the environmental side of things, there's like a timing component. So if you're a migratory fish, you probably need to hit certain environmental windows to be able to be swimming in like the right water temperatures and at the right flows where you need to get to go. And again, if you're delayed, maybe you miss those windows. And there's also this piece about cumulative effects. And like here in the Wenatchee, migratory lamprey need to cross 7 main strand hydroelectric Columbia River dams before they even get to come up to Wenatchee. So all of these kinds of passage issues, whether upstream or downstream, are gonna accumulate and kind of snowball that many cumulative dams and structures to get around. So for fishways, and this is sort of the short list, but some of these are also going to apply more generally to other kinds of restoration projects, things that are problematic for lamprey passage, upstream passage, velocities, high velocities I talked about, and also turbulence. And the rest of them kind of fit more generally into just like stuff that interferes with suction or is a poor attachment surface. So this probably looks pretty familiar. 90-degree corners, love them in all of our structures, especially like our old legacy little barrier dams. Full of them, our fishways are full of them. Can't maintain suction over 90-degree corners. Things like diffuser grading, which a lot of times are used in like fishway attracted areas for like auxiliary water supplies, or sometimes for screening of fish and directing them in places. Again, lamprey can't maintain suction on something like that. There's water. And then of course, like concrete, right? We're building with concrete. It ages, it gets gnarly, right? The cement portion like washes away over time and leaves this exposed aggregate. And again, that's not a great attachment surface, and sometimes it's not sufficient for them to get good purchase. So that's sort of like the fishway passage piece of this, but I also do want to talk specifically about culverts and road crossings. And when it comes down to lamprey, one of the big takeaways is that it really doesn't matter what your perch is, because any perch is going to prevent them from being able to use structures. Because while they're awesome flyers, they can't jump. And so, you know, like a little measly self-respecting trout can totally get up that. It's like a 2-inch perch or whitefish or whatever. They don't like that that's going to be a barrier. So Along those lines with Holbert's, there's some sort of big design considerations, especially for like. So sometimes the steps that are like installed to help with perching, bad for lamprey, they have 93 corners to get up there. What materials used? So, right, like corrugated metal, corrugation, to maintain suction, especially when it ages out, right, and it rusts and the bottom gets like all perforated. So yeah, definitely not the most lamprey friendly material to use. And I think with that, I was gonna move on, talk a little bit about. So I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here, and I know budgets are not always supportive of this kind of work, but yes, stream simulation is really our best option for providing lamprey passage. All of the standard things that I'm sure you all are extremely familiar with, cycling them properly. Using systems that are gonna allow you to reconnect these processes, whether it's putting sediment and organics for natural fish behavior. Specific to lamprey, because they are migrating, especially as adults, really throughout the entire year during that time where they come into fresh water and they migrate on sonic, is the importance of having some sort of flow channel around that they can move. And also the possibility of in projects like this, adding some structure for resting and holding for adults. So in the photo here, you can see that it's like giant holders that are attached to the skull replacement. And that's a really great attachment surface and potentially cover for an adult lamprey that would be up through the structure. Similarly, there's a lot of diversity of substrate size in here. And again, that helps with high quality variability. So that there are basically like micro eddies as the lamprey is moving up through that, they hang out, grab a nice rock, rest for a while, and then continue. As far as specific recommendations for installing these, Pacific Lamprey Conservation Initiative does have some, but they're really specific to Pacific Lamprey. And so that's the document down here. I'm guessing these are all available of those.
It's all right with you, I'll PDF it and share it.
Perfect, yeah, because there's a bunch of good links and resources in here, so please see that. Just want to reiterate though, this is just for Pacific lamprey, and like we don't have anything about our other lamprey species as far as pathogen climbing. But by trying to design around Pacifics at least, you are providing potentially a lot more passage for our smaller volatile body fishes. Any questions on the stream passage stuff? Right. Downstream passage then, this is the ugly, that's what we're trying to avoid. So this is your classic situation where you have some sort of diversion, right? And whether it's like ag diversion, municipal diversion, water supply, whatever, you have some fish streams and they're not adequately sized for lamprey, and a whole ton of lamprey getting trained for the streams. And then at the end of the irrigation season, when water drought happens, or when they need like treatments, just sediment removal, gets dewatered, and there's giant mass stranding events with tens of thousands of lamprey, multiple age cohorts, and then 100% mortality. So really like and the way that we have kind of typically addressed that until this point is with our fish strains. And a common refrain here in this talk is that most of our stuff is focused on salmon steelhead, not for lamprey. So the current use criteria, the 3/32 inch, is really protective of juvenile sunlights, but not so much for lamprey. So that size of screen is really only effective when larval lamprey gets to be between 70 and 90 millimeters in size. And at that point, it's really effective to reduce entrainment, not reduce. So there's two pieces, getting fully trained versus just getting like stuck on the screens and to become 70 to 90 millimeters, you're talking to like 3 or 4 year old. So these screens are basically not effective for preventing multiple age classes of smaller lamprey from getting which is not great. So this is actually like a full-on juvenile lamprey, that was some, migrating, and it still managed to get pretty seriously sandwiched. There has been a little bit of work that's been done on this largely by folks, actually at the USGS Hunt Lab. So, what we do know on the screening side of things, summarized here, and it's really to, if you're working on screening projects, if you in any way can avoid woven wire, because that's the worst. All the other material options are better, especially the plate is better, provided that the holes are down to that like 1 to 3 4 size, that's like feasible for your project. And really the orientation and the angle of screens is something that really matters for entrainment for work. So the ratio of the sweeping velocities to the approach velocities is probably the biggest factor, other than the material you use. And trying to have like 3 to 1 or higher of sweeping velocities to approach velocity for those screens is going to be a thing that helps you reduce the entrainment. Yeah, and hopefully be a little more protective of small. One area of research that I did want to mention, there's an ongoing project this year and next that's a joint effort between the WDFW Screen Shop and US Fish and Wildlife Service, trying to develop some irrigator pump screens that are a little more lamprey friendly. So not your like giant Swiss cheese screens that totally suck up lamprey. They've developed these really small curved-playable screens. And this year is kind of like proof of concept here with the funding the pumps and trying to evaluate, do they actually work? How do they log? And they do their job of moving water from point A to point B without like massive amounts of user intervention. And then provided that they pass that sort of proof of concept, next year there's going to be some work in a lab actually trying to evaluate the impacts, how will they do it, and what we for anything. Sort of like the background piece, sorry.
We've got 18 more minutes.
Okay, I'm gonna try to defend conversation on this demonstration. This is the part where I need to acknowledge, like, I'm in a room of experts and also possibly engineers. And you're likely to find this a little bit hand wavy because in lamprey world, we haven't been studying this stuff to death for 100 years, like studying to death. And there's just a ton of like unknowns, fundamental science that we're still doing. So we don't, in all honesty, have like a whole lot of direct recommendations on the habitat side of things because we're still working on like fundamental questions about these types of things. So when we think about lamprey conservation and habitat restoration sense, we don't have a whole ton of evidence yet about direct benefits. So we're really focusing on trying to understand habitat use. The local threats that lamprey might be facing in the watershed, and then how you can sort of integrate and combine that information into your habitat restoration project. So I'm sorry, not like office space for you, but hopefully we will someday. So integrating lamprey into the restoration process, really that comes at integrating them in every step. And I'll go through pre-project assessment concerns, a little bit about permitting, incorporating design elements that are friendly to lamprey projects, and also implementation of the water work. And this one I want to highlight here later, but I mentioned that there's been a lot of lamprey translocation. So tribal and also like utility districts have been moving adult lamprey and placing them in all these locations where they were extirpated, or in really low numbers. And that in the past like 5 years has been super successful. We have all this like increased distribution and increased numbers of lamprey in places where even like 5-10 years ago, we were largely absent. It's something I'm seeing like working with our local PFW offices now, like they're coming to me and being like, hey, I have like a dock removal project in Columbia and there's like local lamprey at our site. How are we going to deal with this for our project? So going forward with your projects, recognize that like there might be areas where in the past they want on site, and now sort of victims of our own success. They're there, they're moving upwards, you're going to take that into account. Have any of you had that experience yet?
I'll show you a picture after,
In the white room.
but in the upper white salmon, I was doing a deep fish and I found some very small lamprey and I didn't really know what to do. The solution I found was just to not totally dewater it, and I can see them very getting down in the sediments. I just sort of wanted to go off.
Yeah.
We can talk about it offline.
Yeah, and it's all over the state. It's like,
Yeah.
East Cascade, North Central Washington, Yakima, Oklahoma, Milton, Natal. Out east, it's like anywhere you're in that first territory, they've done an exploitation. The QDs in like, really more down there. So, we're in the neighborhood, we're seeing right now, right? So lots of places that they've gone previously and now we do that. The first thing you're gonna do with the project, you're like, hey, member presence, where are they at? And the best resource for that is actually the member distribution map. And this is on the PLCI website, which is member.org. And it just got migrated like 2 weeks ago from the old crappy service provider. And it is super nice, super shiny, has a bunch of layers you can use, like figure out who's there. And it's updated yearly, combines all of the member information we have from like, all the different data sources. And it's throughout their whole, so this is super useful, kind of first place to look. If you don't have that option for some reason, or you need additional information, COHA and still have distributions are pretty useful for where they have been historically. And really one of the big things to consider with any of this, like early present, is are there impassable downstream barriers that prevent lamprey from being agricultural site. I talked a little bit about understanding habitat requirements and access to site level presence for habitat types. Again, do you have habitat that you your site? In the case of larvae, it's sediments that again are cool, well-washed areas, and in adults, do you have coarse material for them to hold over on and also spawn problems. And this is also an area to think about the threats that may be impacting lamprey intervention and whether or not that's going to prevent being at your project site. Water quality is a big one, so not even just like chemical or contaminant issues, but water temperature. So like the whole barrier, below the atmosphere, for example, there are not local lamprey, like area near the gate and causeway, because it just gets too hot. And passage issues again, because there are passage barrier downstream that's going to prevent them. So this is kind of the like in silico, how you can do some research on whether lamprey theoretically are present at your site. And then you can go and do your project field assessment, which is fun stuff. Typically, this is going to be with electrofishing or DNA. Again, it's indicated that you have lamprey in the area, you want to confirm that. You're generally looking to confirm presence. And one thing to keep in mind, because they are such good climbers, sometimes what's a barrier to salmon is actually not a barrier to lamprey. And this is especially true if you're dealing with systems that have like smooth exposed to bedrock. As we saw with the falls, they can kind of smooth up stuff. 15, 20, 30 feet high, that salmon may not go past. So looking upstream is important to identify whether or not you have lamprey, below your project area, your project area. And what we're really trying to identify in this case for adults is like spawning grapples in your area and high larval densities, right? Especially in project design.
What's the process of doing the EDMA? How difficult is that?
Complicated question. Compared to doing like a really in-depth survey, super cost effective, but you need to go with a well-reputed lab and people who are experienced with it. So I think sometimes EDMA is like those like awesome citizen science tool, and you're a third grader can do it, no problem. And with proper oversight, yes, but it does require, in order to get good quality results, it needs to be conducted properly, and there's definitely some training and some expertise that's important.
But potentially, if you knew you were gonna do a project on a site in a year, if you wanted to know, doing the plan for lamprey there.
Go out, get a couple of lab, get their sampling protocol, go out, collect your samples. Anyone working with EDMA, is anyone here working with EDMA? That's.
Yeah, well, so there's a citizen science project that's getting developed, correct?
So Rocky Mountain Research Station is who like our office works with Missouri EPA, and they've been a really big advocate of some science projects. And they're one of the bigger like kind of throughput style labs available for EPA right now. And there's so much demand that they're super backed up. So if you are gonna do it, you want to plan on at least 6-9 months of processing time around the samples to get back the information. Permitting, not a permitting expert, but what I'm gonna share with you is, the good news is, for there not being, say, listed species at federal level, there's like no additional burden that you need to deal with. Apart from what you would normally be doing. At the state level, things get a little bit murky, and I feel like this is actually an area that's like kind of currently undergoing some change and some scrutiny. So I don't want to put my foot in it by telling you the wrong thing. So I would say, you're working in an area where you suspect there are lamprey, you confirm that with a site assessment. Talk to your local habitat bio and your DFW office, who's doing your HPA, and consult with them on how they might want to approach this, and if they think there's going to need to be any like conditioning of your permit. Because in some cases there will be, and in some cases there won't, and it seems like it's a little bit variable on how that's getting applied right now. And again, if you're working anywhere on tribal land or with tribal funding, chances are good that you will need to be funding for that as well. In honor of kind of the cultural ideological stuff. And this again was sort of this note about due to the successful translocation of talent, right? It's getting previously for your spirit forming terms. So now kind of getting back to the habitat piece, really all about what habitat restoration projects are designed to address this history of loss of acidification in our streams, loss of function. So things like longitudinal connectivity, lateral connectivity, temporary connections, multiple flow paths, large wood, sediment dynamics, beavers, right? Riparian trees, and damping down of high and low flow regimes. So projects that are going to benefit lamprey are really going to address all of these things by encouraging stream complexity. I realize that's like a really dumbed down message, but that's kind of where we're at. And the piece of this that I would highlight, I've talked about this a little bit, is sort of rethink our relationship with vines, because that is such an important part of their life history or maybe ecosystem. And in salmon world, right? Like we are like, no vines are terrible, or we just ignore them. And really with lamprey restoration, we want to be thinking about projects that are complex enough, they are going to develop patches of fine sediment and not like huge amounts for like mass smothering of eggs level, but sediment sorting and like distinct patches that will support rural habitat. How do we get at that? And we have a structure. So large wood enhancements, benefits for adults and larval lamprey. You get more sediment sorting, so you get more vegetation inclusion areas. You get some fine sediment patches, and you also get some call responding area. You increase your flow link activity, your flow path velocity. You get increased public for those calls. And this is probably gathered to you, I'm sure this is hugely required here, but like not all origin projects are created equal. So there was a pretty cool study that John Crandall with Metcalf Senior Recovery Foundation did, looking at larval lamprey use of woody debris projects in both the Aniak and the Tower rivers. And a sort of summary of that, but the take home was that, yeah, it's these like really big complex jams that are making different microhabitat, providing cover, providing good attachment services that are beneficial for lamprey and like not so much the old school, like one of the trees staked down the center of the river. Also, PAL's a great way to again provide all of these benefits and more. The previous ones for larval lamprey. Another design consideration that's really beneficial is anything that is enhancing lateral connectivity. So removing channel confining structures, increasing vertical lateral connectivity, increasing wetted area, which is going to help with flow path diversity, giving the river the ability to create forest habitat, supporting like multiple life stages. And this can also be really important when the different habitats are located in proximity to each other. So like we don't have big distances to move to access different types of habitat. And sort of all important year round what it finds sediments for local area. And the one sort of really good hard and fast example we have of this came from a stage 0 restoration project that ran in South Portland, Mackenzie River and 5 Mile Creeks. And they did this giant stage 0 restoration, and they did a bunch of pre and post monitoring and occupancy modeling for lamprey, and showed really great benefits to lamprey distribution and abundance in the restored area. And there's kind of a second stage of that that's happening in Forest Creeks, kind of over the next couple of years. And Julie Harris has a paper, she works for Ocean Wildlife Service, putting this out just this year. It's kind of the best white paper, like shoulder literature we have relating stage 0 restoration to lamprey conservation. Finally, on the design of things, anything that improves water quality project price is going to be beneficial to lamprey. They do need to water. Question about thermal tolerance, gotta keep it below 20 degrees C. Again, excessive sediment loads from lamprey too. Their eggs are just as likely to get smaller. They have this extended period, it's like 3 to 13 years in fresh water. During that time, they're going to bioaccumulate everything. Pesticides, herbicides, chemicals, all of that stuff. And we don't even like have a handle on how that affects their mortality, their maturation, and even. So your kinds of projects that are going to include stuff that provides shade and keeps bad stuff out of the water and helps water quality will benefit lamprey as well. Riparian plantings and fence posts, securing water rights and use water efficiently is kind of the one. And also anything that addresses stormwater. And on the implementation side of things, at this point, we talked a little bit about how successful lamprey salvage is really time intensive. So on the implementation side of things, you're trying to reduce impacts where you can. Again, they're not all listed species, so the bar isn't quite as high as it would be for salmon or steelhead or ultra. Questions you can ask that'll help with this, are there changes you can make to either the extent or the timing of your project that will avoid lamprey? So can you maintain a wetland area within your project footprint? Can you limit the extent of your excavation? Or because you did your awesome great project study field assessment, and you know where you have areas like high local density, can you avoid those areas with your project? Our in-water work periods that every monster does. It's with someone and it's to be protected with them. Lamprey are pretty much present in our stream in one life history stage or another 100% of the time. So if they're present, you're going to be impacting some life stage of lamprey. It's just inevitable. As far as salvage goes and also kind of monitoring in project, your best option is going to be using electric fishing. And while there are pretty cool lamprey specific electric fishers that I use that were developed by Lamprey Control in the Midwest, I think most folks are probably a little more familiar with the LR24 for deep fishing. Is that what folks here in the room are using? Yeah. This is like the Smith Group backpack shocker that like everybody has.
Yeah.
The good news about this is that you can actually fish successfully for lamprey just using the salmon settings. But more recently, Smith Group has come up with a whole set of lamprey specific settings that you can program your LR24. And this gives you like a dual phase shocking. So the first part of it is for like your larval lamprey that are down in the sediment. The first phase encourages them to like emerge and come out. And then the second phase is kind of traditional electrofishing where it stuns them all places that fish they can eat them. And aquarium nets, little ABD aquarium nets are going to be your best friend for any kind of lamprey salvage, really fun fish. So the swim through information for anyone who's using that is also linked here. You're going to want to come up with a lamprey salvage plan. This is something that you're DFW, HPA permitted habitat biome you may want to see. Again, highlighting things in this plan like avoiding dewatering where you can, avoiding high areas of local density, avoiding inland spawning areas. One approach we recommend is that when you are defishing your project site, go through and do your like regular electrofishing first, right? So do your salmon settings, get all your bony fish out, get your salmon, your trout, your scoldens, get all those guys out. And then you go back and you do your lamprey electrofishing afterwards. And that means that you don't have any additional electrofishing impacts to those bony fish, especially those teeny species. And you can use the lamprey settings without worrying about not being effective for those other fish you've already removed. You're gonna wanna have appropriate tools. So I mentioned burning nets, lots of buckets, depending on how many fish you have on site, it's gonna be like incredibly time intensive. So when we do salvage, which Lamprey in the Grand Canal, it's like oftentimes a 2-week effort and we're not even close to getting all fish out of the canal, just between where it develops and the spring.
What do you do with them once you get it, they're in the buckets?
That's a great question. So PB actually is permitted by DFW and we are returning to the river. They release them at a couple sites downstream that have purple. But it's kind of a weird one because we'll pull like 40,000, 50,000 larvae out of it. And then you're like, well, there's 5 decent patches of habitat downstream of Comanche that we just don't do gazillion larvae into. But it's stunning and we have looked at survival of salvaged fish very well. But it's, the assumption is that it's still better than just like 20% mortality if they were like, regarding drawdown rates, this is something that really can make a difference. So Marty, the D at USGS Group Lab has a bunch of work and there's a technical work group white paper about dewatering considerations for lamprey that just came out. The take home is that slower is better. That actually gives them some opportunity to salvage and emerge from the sediment and get to the water. So the slower the better. The recommendation, if you can do it, is like literally 1 to 2 vertical inches of change per hour. So a lot of times that means coordinating and starting dewatering activities rather than anything else. And you can also do things like you can do wet areas and then draw down again and allow more lamprey to come up. It does appear like there are kind of 2 different strategies, right? There's like stayers and goers in purple lamprey. And the goers generally are gonna leave pretty quickly, like when it's dewatered within 30 minutes. But there's lots of exceptions to that. And so a caveat here is like, have some buckets and some nets and just like leave them on site. Because 72 hours later or 6 days later, there may be larval lamprey popping up. So be salvaged if you've got something. And I do want to mention dry electrofishing because this is something where like you go through, you do your bony fish removal, you go through, you do your lamprey removal, you think you got everyone, and then you can very effectively capture more by not fishing the wetting area, but just the area of mud that still has moisture in it, but isn't fully submerged. So you like think you completed your job, and then you can do the video. You shot the mud bank next to the channel. This is very typically what we see where gazillions of larval lamprey just let it boil out mud and came out. Put in a bucket and release some that's probably got shot. Wanted to talk briefly about dredging. This is an area that's still pretty ongoing. Local lampreys are going to be located just like the top 9 inches of your column. So if you're looking at smaller projects, you can really make a sort of safe estimation that if you're removing the top 12 inches, that's where the bulk of your lamprey are going to be located. Ideally, you would be able to then replace that sediment someplace back in the water that doesn't like completely screw up as far as turbidity concerns, which doesn't happen. That's the best option, just put the lamprey in the mud, back where it needs to go in the river. If you can't do that, you can do sorting on the bank, going through by hand. And that kind of works, but we again don't have good information on what survival looks like for big selfish lamprey. The common sense says it's probably not the greatest. So, I think I should have put your stuff back in the stream. And deep or really big projects are just a town. We don't have the answers for that currently. There's one research that's going on that. It's like, you know, California, like barges that have like mechanical sediment sorters that theoretically pull them right out of the ground. It's, yeah, it's not sorted, but we don't have good answers, sadly. So really you're talking at this point about like trying to avoid high density areas, if you can. And in a lot of our big river systems, that's associated with broken belts. The larvae are coming out of those rivers and tend to deposit on people's.
Do you see much difference in like, presence at intertidal zones versus, say, where not intertidal zones?
I don't know a ton about rural lamprey in intertidal areas. They definitely utilize them, and I should get back to them, because I just don't know enough. I know that there's like evidence in freshwater around hydropeaking, where it's still the density water they're not using, but immediately, 6 inches below that fluctuation zone, they are. I'm assuming that would be similar in your title. Yeah, but I don't know how much, as far as the tolerance is for the larvae, how much they're using. That we see. And again, anyone who's interested in dredging, there are some good resources that can emerge. And my last piece of this sentence is recommendations for resources that you've all come up with. There's a ton of information at Pacific Lamprey level, the conservation initiative website. So white papers, publications, connections with different work groups on everything from like recommendations on the work windows, impingement, dewatering recommendations, passive recommendations. It's all there. Also the distribution is there. Overall, from PLCI, I just encourage folks to get involved with this. In Washington, we have 6 different regional management units. So if you're working in a place with lamprey in Washington State, you are in a regional management unit. We're seeing for the people like me, because I've been the one from Central Washington, who are total on this and will help you with your projects. And along those lines, one of the really good resources we have is the Google work group. And there are subgroups of this group in all these different areas. So specific to this audience, things that may be interesting are passage engineering, juvenile entrainment, and restoration subgroups. And again, that's going to be in touch with experts who deal with this stuff on a regular basis, on lamprey specific context, and also any recent publications and literature. And if anyone have questions about Libras, because I feel like it's so.
Can I just interject? We are out of time, and I'm sorry, I should have given you a few minute warning, so I think we're gonna have to hold questions, and if it's all right, I'll share your contact
Absolutely.
info. Did you have any more slides to get through?
Yep.
Thank you so much for being here. Let's give it.